Hello, I'm Tony.
And I'm Kimberly.
Welcome to Better Together. Thank you for joining us. Hey, there's something I want to talk to you about, and I've been wanting to run this by you and talk about it for a minute. I want to talk about, and I know this is going to sound kind of random and off the wall, but I want to talk about the effects of cultural humanism on marriages and on relationship.
Now, what exactly is cultural humanism?
Humanism is actually, technically, humanism, according to the courts, is a religion,
Really?
like anything else. But it's the idea that man is kind of the center of everything. In other words, there is no theistic perspective, but man himself is the end all of everything. And there's a lot of different aspects to humanism. So if you're a humanist or you embrace humanistic ideology or theology, or lack thereof, don't send me a dirty message. But
I was going to say, don't tune us out yet.
Yeah, don't tune us out just yet. But some things work in the real world, and some things don't. And I think one of the things that our culture is facing is we've been moving away from a God-centered culture to a human-centered culture, and as a result, some things happen. Humanism is the idea that humans decide moral standards, humans decide reference points, humans decide what is just and what is equitable and all of those things, as opposed to having, an outside source like the Bible or God as a reference point. We become the reference point. Now, the problem with that is humanity's or humanism's reference point is totally subjective. Let me tell you why I say it's important to marriage, because I think the more that we've embraced in our culture the humanistic perspective, and I don't think a lot of people sit around and go, hey, I want to be a humanist. I think that they just begin to think and consider things through their feelings and their perspectives, thinking everybody kind of is equal.
Right. Well, it sounds like if we're speaking of the context of marriage or
right.
Relationships, and it sounds like they would equally be at war all the time, because how can my opinions be better than your opinions, and vice versa? And
that's exactly what we see in the culture. We're going, well, your ideas and my ideas, they're all the same. There's no good, there's no bad, there's no moral standard from those. And as we've seen our culture deviate from a singular moral standard, the Judeo-Christian moral standard, what's happened is we've seen a fragmentation of our culture. There is no patriotism or allegiance because everything is so subjective. And my allegiance to the state or to the government or to the idea of America is only as strong as it agrees with my ideologies. Now, let me back this off. Here's what I'm saying. If there is no reference point in the context of relationship, you talk about chaos.
Yes.
It all becomes about your ability to make me happy and my ability to make you happy. And then how we define what happiness is.
Well, and then I even take it, since we're talking about that, it sounds to me like humanism would affect future culture, future generations, because let's say you have kids now.
Right.
And well, your way of raising them versus my way of raising them, they're equally good.
Or equally bad.
Or equally bad.
Right.
Then how do the kids know who to follow or what to follow?
Well, that's why I think it's so detrimental, and I think that's why we're seeing, some of the social collapse that we're seeing in America, and some of the massive collapses that we see in the context of marriage and relationship.
Okay.
I think people are struggling a lot in the context of relationship because there is no standard. There is no perceived value. So I would ask folks who are watching, what is the standard of your marriage or of your relationship? In other words, what are the rules? What are the guidelines? And I think that a lot of the guidelines that we try to adopt, maybe subliminally, maybe not directly of our culture is everybody can be right, or your opinion. There's some things that work in reality and some things that don't. There's some things that work in marriage and some things that don't. So what happens when your standard of marriage is not equal, or your value of marriage is not equal? So if you don't have a reference point, that means that suddenly I'm creating one. So like for us, and we've seen how this works in the real world.
Okay.
What is our reference point for relationship?
What is our reference point? The Bible.
Yeah, the Bible. So that means God, Jesus, the Bible. That means that the standard of love that we adopt is a singular standard, and we conform to that standard. That's very obvious. But if I were to ask your average couple out there, okay, what's the definition of love? See, we have a functional definition of what love is.
Right.
Whereas there may be people watching right now who have no idea of what love is.
Right. So for us, love is patient, love is kind, love is not self-seeking, love doesn't seek its own way.
Love for us
It's denying myself for someone else.
Right. Love for us is something that is functional.
Okay.
Love for us is something that is observable and measurable and repeatable. And for a lot of people, who may have adopted different perspectives, or a humanistic perspective, or a perspective that's not based on something, all of that becomes subjective. So if you come into a relationship, and I see this all the time, we come into a relationship and you have an idea of what love is. You think love is me bringing you flowers.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
I mean, love never seeks its own, but all of a sudden, that's not my idea of love. My idea of love is self-sacrificing. So I'm going to work thinking I'm showing you a functional definition of love, but you're not getting flowers, so you don't feel loved.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's no standard. And I think that what's happening, in our culture as a whole, and I hate to kind of mix these two together, but I'll just tell you, as our culture goes, so goes our relationships and our marriages. As our marriages and family goes, so goes America.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the confusion and the fragmentation is because we've deviated from a standard.
And I would venture to say it's not only America. America is affected, but really any culture who chooses to do that.
Right.
The culture would cease to exist.
So it would cease to exist peacefully.
Exactly.
And when you inundate when you make yourself the center or the standard, and your feelings are the thing that determines the morals, it changes. Think about it. You learn, you grow, you get additional information. There's never this anchor. And I think that what happens is, because marriages aren't anchored in unity, because let's be honest, by nature we're selfish and we want what's best for us in that moment.
Oh man, right. And let's be honest, who wants to get married nowadays?
Yeah, and part of that's why.
Some people do want to get married outside of a healthy context for marriage.
Yeah, it's kind of like we used to go shooting back before we got married.
And I used to do a lot.
And you pretended that you loved me and you were interested in what
I rode a motorcycle. Well, once.
That lasted for a bit. But anyway, so
we digress.
Just imagine that you're trying to hit a target, and that target is constantly moving.
Ooh,
that's exactly what we're talking about. So you're trying to have successful marriage without core values. And if you say, well, we have core values, and I say, well, what are you basing those core values on? And you can't point definitively to something. Those core values are subjective.
Ooh, okay.
So all of a sudden, you're seeing this element of subjectivity, and that's exactly what we're talking about in our culture, and that's what humanism does. It makes everything subjective, and you lose those objective things that you can come into unity over. And subjectivity means that it's subject to change. Yeah. And
right. Instead of an absolute truth.
Instead of an absolute truth. Now, I think that over time there's been a systematic destruction or disassembling of the idea of absolute truth. The problem is that reality hasn't changed. The problem is we can adopt humanistic ideas. We can adopt different ideas of marriage. Problem is they don't work. And I think we're seeing that increasingly.
Well, yeah, and absolutely. I would concur with what you're saying, because you can look at, if you take someone's blood, and then you can still determine that they are male or female.
Right.
Regardless of
how they feel about it.
Exactly. Right. I mean, that's an absolute truth.
Right. That's a biological reality that is not subject. And that's why in definitions, you'll hear people try to separate the idea of sex and gender. In fact, somebody was saying the other day that, hey, you know what? Science has proven that, sex and gender are not the same thing. And I went, stop. Science has not proven anything or even come to any of those conclusions. That is a philosophical conclusion. Those are definition issues. But anyway, that's exactly the point. When nothing is static, how can you expect to have good relationship? In other words, when and where is forgiveness appropriate? And what does forgiveness look like? When you suddenly take away a reference point and you think that your marriage and relationship is going to be successful based on something that you can't even define, how can we even determine a home run? How can we even determine what love is in this crazy world of subjectivity and humanism?
Right.
But, and that's why we encourage folks. If you want successful relationship, it needs to be built on something. And again, and I know people might want to argue this point. The problem is all arguments fail in the face of reality. If we don't walk in true forgiveness and we have some other form of forgiveness other than what the Bible tells us, then all of a sudden we're harboring animosity.
Right.
We haven't let go of it completely. We're looking to be reimbursed or repaid or restored according to our own individual expectations, not a solid standard.
Right, or retribution.
Yeah. And I know this may seem like a rambling to a lot of people, but think of how core or how central this issue is in so many marriages. Even when it comes to infidelity and other things, all of that can go so sideways. But what is your standard? In the Word of God we see that it's a heart issue. It goes down to the very motives of relationship, especially when it comes to commitment and infidelity and sex and all of those things. It is a commitment of the heart that refuses to even look anywhere else, and so that's a little bit higher standard than what humanism or the world or a lot of other people say, but Jesus is like this. He's like, man, if you even look at a woman inappropriately and you entertain inappropriate things in your heart concerning that person, you've already blown it.
Right. And I would have to say that is the one thing, that not the one thing, but that is one of the things that I have absolutely appreciated about you throughout our entire marriage when there are questionable women to look at, or you have continuously turned away or hid your eye. Is that a word?
Hid your eyes.
Hid your eyes.
Covered your eyes or around like
yes.
this. Yeah. No. Well, but those are agreed inner convictions that determine outward behavior. And when you don't have those inner convictions based on something solid, it just leads to confusion.
Interesting.
Anyway, so I would strongly suggest when it comes to goals, when it comes to standards and morals and
relationships.
Yeah, in relationships and expectations and all of that stuff, that you base those on something clear and defined. You say, hey, I don't believe in the Bible. I don't believe in, the Jesus stuff and the Word of God stuff. Fine. I don't think that's wise, but you still have to function in reality.
Yes.
And whether you agree with these aspects or not, I'm going to ask you to consider what we've been talking about, because we do need a standard. How can you grade a test? How do you pass? What's a score? What is success in a relationship? Those are all questions that I think if we will begin to discuss openly with one another and candidly and say what works, what doesn't work, and why, I think we can come to some really good conclusions.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Any closing thought, final thought?
Well, I don't know if this is a final or closing thought or if I'm just opening up another can of worms, but it was similar to, someone wanted to grade papers in red ink. And I remember you coming along and going, or not red ink because that showed something negative. And so you were like, okay, well then what I'm hearing you say is then whatever color you choose, they're all going to be associated with being negative
or getting it wrong
right. So
instead of one, but there's a lot of different philosophies out there, I think, is your point.
Yes.
But we really need to think through what our philosophies are and should be and why.
And I was about to say, and why.
Yeah, you know, and I'm a proponent. Somebody asked me a while back, they said, why do you say, and this word, this was supposed to really trip me up. He said, why is Christianity, with all of the other religions out there, why Christianity? He said, man, I've asked, you know, a lot of pastors these questions and it trips them up all the time. And he's waiting for this profound answer. I said, because Christianity is consistent with reality. And reality proves a lot of the other ones wrong. God made this world, so it stands to reason that his ways would be the best ways in this world. And reality proves that out. When we do it God's way, humanity flourishes. When we deviate from doing it God's way, especially in the context of marriage and family, we don't flourish.
No.
You know, so I think that reality comes along and squelches a lot of these ideologies and even humanism, big time humanism, because everything can't be subjective and think there's going to be any justice.
None.
Because all of a sudden, well, what's justice? Well, you have an idea of it, I have an idea of it, and we default to some institution to enforce it according to their ideology of it.
That sounds like a hot mess.
Oh, it is. And we're seeing it all the time. Everybody's demanding justice, but everybody has a different standard of what justice is. Anyway, and that can be same thing. And again, I want to pull that back to relationship. What are you basing your relationship on? I would strongly encourage you. Let your relationship and let your commonality be based upon the standard of the Word of God, because we are truly better together. All right. God bless you. We look forward to seeing you next time.